Well, good. We got a pretty good audience showing up. Glad to see everyone here. Um, and got a lot of questions for Brink, but I also hope some others of you have brought questions, and I hope this will be a stimulating conversation. It definitely is a topic that I think a lot of us have been wrestling with, is like kind of what the hell has been going on for the last ten years, and what can we do to fix it? So before I we jump into the questions themselves, Brink, why don't you just tell us a little bit about sort of your background? And because I think I probably first came across you when you wrote the libertarianism article, excuse me,
Okay.
for,
Yes.
for the New Republic, and I remember Will Wilkinson wrote a lot about that.
I can believe it. That was almost 20 years ago now.
I know, boy, time flies. But so why don't you just tell us about like your background and kind of the course corrections or pivots you've made in the last 15, 20 years, and kind
Sure.
of how that led to this book.
Well, first of all, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I spent the first 8 or 9 years of my career in legal practice doing mostly international trade regulation. And then I made the swap of psychic income for pecuniary income and went to think tank life, where I spent most of my time with the Cato Institute for 20 plus years. I did a little sojourn with the Kauffman Foundation, which is a foundation located in Kansas City that supports entrepreneurship. And at the time, they had a think tank inside of their foundation, so I was involved in that for a while. But most of my adult career was spent as a professional libertarian with the Cato Institute. I don't really have a good label for my ism right now. I don't really believe in any isms wholeheartedly. Um, Irving Kristol once defined a neoconservative back in the 1970s as a liberal who had been mugged by reality. So I don't know what I am, but I'm a libertarian who got mugged by the 21st century. So I just came to the deepening sense that the insights that libertarianism gives us, which I believe are real, weren't terribly well aligned with the challenges that were facing us in the 21st century. The the suspicion of centralized power, that's an oldie but a goodie, and I still have it. Belief in the enormous creativity and productivity of bottom up, uncentrally planned, uncoordinated, uncentrally directed activity mediated through markets, a deep sensitivity to how even the best intended government programs can go wrong. These are the partial truths that libertarianism holds on to, and that I think when it arose as a movement in the 60s and 70s were dramatically underappreciated at that time. We had experienced a huge increase in the role, size, and scope of government, and a very uncritical sort of sensibility about and naivete about government during the post-war decades in the United States and in Europe. One third of the world was ruled by regimes that thought that there was no role for markets whatsoever in economic life. So I think at that time the partial truths of libertarianism were badly underappreciated, and so its entry onto the scene was pushing things in the right direction. But I kind of lost that faith during the 21st century, and again, I still see power in those insights, but rather than see them as sort of reasons why we should dismantle the 20th century regulatory and welfare state, I now see them as tools for making the modern state work more effectively. So um, I moved from Cato to the Niskanen Center, which is a kind of post-ideological, nonpartisan, deeply nonpartisan think tank. Our real identity is that we don't belong to either red team or blue team. We appreciate the importance of the values prized by those on the left and the right. We don't look for bipartisan ideas that hold everybody's policy preferences fixed and try to split the loaf. We look for transpartisan policy ideas that can appeal simultaneously to conservatives for conservative reasons and progressives for progressive reasons, and in that way try to transcend the polarization that we're now stuck in. So that's my day job. Um, I, Ever since I took that day job in 2017 at Niscan, I was uh, had the sense that the policy wonkery we were doing there at the surface of things was being buffeted by deep subterranean forces, and that the real action wasn't really at the level of policies. It was at the level of institutions, and even deeper than that, at culture. And so this wasn't just happening in the United States; it was happening all over the world. So I really had this sense that something profound was going on throughout the most developed world, and I spent a few years trying to make sense of that in my own mind before starting to scribble about it on Substack, and then my Substack led to the book that we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic. That's a um, great overview of how we got here. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So the whole frame of the book, The Permanent Problem, is based on the Keynes essay, which is remarkably prescient. I mean, he was doing this in the Great Depression and sort of
It's a wonderful essay.
predicting that we're going to
It
be
gets some things terribly, terribly wrong, and it's very wrong-headed on some things, but it's just delightfully ambitious.
yeah, he's predicting this mass abundance. And but one of the things he predicts is or imagines is a 15-hour work week, which doesn't really feel like that's come to pass for a
No.
lot of us. And so, without forcing you to defend Keynes, is that does that sort of point to maybe a larger problem with his idea, or do you think that that's kind of shown up in different ways? What do you think about that part?
Well, I think he got some things right and some things wrong when he looked 100 years into the future, which is basically what he was trying to do in that essay. Um, so basically looking to a few years from now. Um, so he got right that the world would be dramatically richer, and that as a result, what he called the economic problem, which is basically securing enough food, shelter, and clothing to keep serious material deprivation at bay. He thought that problem would be more or less solved in the advanced countries, and I think that is correct. And he argued that that didn't mean all our problems were over. We wouldn't stop worrying. We would start worrying about new things. And so, as the economic problem receded, what he called humanity's permanent problem would loom into view, and that is, in his words, how to live wisely and agreeably and well with the blessings that scientific progress and modern economic growth had bestowed upon us. So he then argues also, I think quite presciently, that this transition from solving the economic problem to mastering the permanent problem was going to be nasty and traumatizing. He thought it was going to require the unlearning of habits that had been ingrained over countless generations, a completely new orientation of life. And so he thought that it wasn't going to be easy, and that he imagined that societies would undergo something like what he called a general nervous breakdown. And so that it was that particular prediction that really connected with me at this time when I was trying to think about what's going wrong, why have we gone so badly off course with all of our blessings? And it seemed to me that a general nervous breakdown was a pretty decent description of the kind of melees that the United States and other advanced democracies find themselves in these days. So I think there is real insight there. So that's the basic thesis of the book, is that our problems today are the result of being in this no man's land between one great world historical achievement, the conquest of poverty, and a possible next one, which is the translation of material plenty into spiritual plenty, into widespread opportunities for flourishing lives, so that we've moved the goalposts, we've raised our expectations of what constitutes a well-lived life from just surviving adequately to finding purpose and belonging and meaning and status, and developing and exercising our capacities and realizing our potential, that this is now, how we define success, and maybe for a larger percentage of people than has it's ever been the case for in human history, we're doing that for a sizable minority of people. But I still think that the majority of folks are still on the outside looking in. That in many ways, both the changing economic structures since the achievement of mass affluence and the cultural responses to mass affluence have actually complicated the task of translating material plenty into mass flourishing. And so we have basically a weakening connection between economic growth and overall well-being, especially for people outside of the professional and managerial elite. So that even as our material comforts and conveniences continue to pile up, a number of really important indicators about well-being are flashing red and pointing in the wrong direction.
Okay, yeah, terrific. So one of the things you describe in the book is the middle flourishing trap, which I think is a great phrase. But what makes it what makes it a trap rather than just a lagging indicator?
Well, so
Um,
first I'm riffing off the economic concept of the middle income trap. So poor countries, there's a mix of policies that enable you to get off the bottom rung, that enable you to attract foreign investment, that you've got some decent infrastructure, you've got social peace, you don't have hyperinflation. You've got a relatively stable environment for investors from abroad, and if you've got that mix of policies, you can get off the ground and get out of you know uh, deep poverty and up into the middle income ranks. And we've seen one country after another pull that off in recent decades. But once you get up into the sort of middle income ranks, uh, uh, you require sort of a new mix of policies and institutions to keep pushing you. You need a much better educated workforce. You need well operating financial markets to allocate capital better. You need to have a real state capacity and effective civil service and not rife with corruption. Um, so so you have to up your game. But meanwhile, you've just had this spectacular run of economic growth from poverty to middle income, and a lot of people have built up vested interests based on that institutional and policy mix, and a lot of political parties have won legitimacy and trust because they brought home the bacon, in this prior phase. And so there just isn't much appetite for tearing things down and rebuilding to keep pushing upwards. And so you get stuck being satisfied where you are and not continue to go. And so we see it's fairly common for countries to get part of the way, but then get stuck in the middle and not be able to push to full developed country status. So my analogy is that we're stuck in this kind of middle flourishing trap, that we have achieved, utterly unprecedented and really unimagined material prosperity that just goes beyond the wildest dreams of generations past. Um, and for, something like 20 to 30% of the population, they have jobs that are, intellectually challenging, that have a sort of structure your whole life through a career path, that are competitive and therefore give you status to win, that give you a lot of autonomy on the job to exercise your expertise, not have a lot of people telling you what to do. You're your own kind of boss to a significant extent. All of that imbues work with some real intrinsic rewards, not just the paycheck at the end of the day. But most people don't have that. For most people, jobs are drudgery, and there's some fun times and there's some nice coworkers, but there's a lot of drudgery and a lot of tedium and a lot of stress and a lot of precarity, and so they're not in a position to fully develop their capacities in the workplace. Meanwhile, outside of the workplace, that absorbs the majority of their working hours, and so a lot of their leisure is spent exhausted and zoning out in front of the tube. Meanwhile, the attractions of consumerism have become so irresistible, particularly the attractions of sitting all by yourself in a room staring at a screen, um, that sort of more difficult pleasures that have longer term, more durable rewards, the pleasures of human interaction and human relationships and flesh and blood connections, have gone by the wayside more and more. We have just an unraveling of social connection and personal relationships in recent decades. And that really is the foundation of flourishing for most people. And so we have a situation where most people aren't really getting flourishing from the job. They're not getting status from the job. In fact, I would argue, and we can go into this later, that the status of ordinary workers today is rather lower than the status of ordinary workers during the industrial era. And so there's really been kind of a downward mobility in social stature for ordinary workers. And then meanwhile, outside of work, the most important thing and the most important determinant of flourishing, which is the quality and quantity of your connections to other people, is going in the wrong direction for a whole lot of people. And so we're stuck. But this system has delivered, more than any system ever before. This cultural mix has delivered a higher level of flourishing than any has before. And so there's a lot of resistance to thinking there's any other thing to do other than just keep going in the same direction that we're going.
Yeah, and that's a good what you talk about, sort of the pivot from consumption to connection. And the challenge is, like, consumer capitalism is extraordinarily good at sort of commodifying that too, right? That's like social media. And so how do you distinguish genuine connection from kind of a market simulacrum, and what's how do you, so you say this thing is real and this thing is not real. How do you make that
Yeah.
distinction?
So if it's, the realist relations are occurring completely outside the cash nexus, right? You're not paying your friends to hang out with you. There's a difference between romance and, prostitution, right? One's a commercial outlay of money, another is, an affair of the heart, right? And those are two qualitatively different things. So the realm of I and thou is a realm of two people who are connecting at a profound level, not just using each other instrumentally for market-based gain. So flesh and blood relationships that you're not paying money for, those are the things that really matter. And there's an enormous latitude in what can constitute flourishing, but if you don't have strong personal connections in your life, then for all but a very strange breed of real loners who live almost entirely through their projects and in their head rather than in their relationships, you're going to be miserable. And most people are that way. And so the decline in the quality and quantity of connection that we've seen is, I think, bad news for most people.
Yeah. So let's talk about the triple crisis. So you say there's really, there's three kind of interlock crises. There's inclusion, kind of what we just touched on, dynamism and politics. And those all kind of interact. Do you see, which do you see as most kind of causally upstream? And if you had to choose one lever among those three to push on, which one would it be?
Yeah. So first, I talk about the crisis of capitalism, and by capitalism, I mean the whole social system. So the combination of competitive markets and a bureaucratic state, and the consumerist motivations that are behind it, and the scientific, establishment that whose progress fires innovation in the marketplace. All of that, sort of modern science and consumerism and bureaucratic states and competitive markets, that whole mix is what I'm referring to as capitalism. And then on the cherry on top for most of us is a bureaucratic state that is subject to the rule of law and popular control, so liberal democratic capitalism. but capitalism is now globally dominant. And I argue that capitalism has entered into a crisis in the 21st century. And by crisis, I mean not something that's about to blow up tomorrow. This is a slow burn crisis that is unfolding over decades. But by crisis, I mean that the stakes are high, that things are liable to either get much, much better than they are today or considerably worse than they are today. So we are at a kind of inflection point. And I say that this crisis has three dimensions. So the first one is the crisis of inclusion, and this is this weakening connection between economic growth and conditions for overall well-being. Beyond that is this crisis of dynamism, which is that subsidiary but important problem, the capacity of the system itself to continue chugging and producing economic growth. And so that's been sputtering, not in the United States to a lesser degree than the rest of the world, but all throughout the advanced capitalist economies. Economic performance in the 21st century is off considerably from what it was in the 20th. And there's a broader sense of kind of sclerosis, that it's very difficult to get big things done anymore in the world of atoms. There's a whole elaborate vetocracy that rises up and says no whenever anybody wants to rearrange atoms at large scale. So both of these problems are ones that we might attack through collective action, and so there are ways that we could use politics to address both of these crises. But alas, the realm of politics is perhaps the most dysfunctional of the three. So its politics is not downstream, is not upstream from the problems that are afflicting capitalism. It's downstream from them. It's caught up in them, and so I think. Liberal democratic governance as a problem-solving institution has deteriorated badly. It's wandered off into a kind of sterile, performative theater that focuses much more on spectacle and on kind of zero-sum status contests between demographic groups rather than actually solving collective problems in our shared interest. And then most obviously here in the democratic world, the basic norms, institutions, and values of liberal democracy are under severe stress in recent years. And so the health and integrity of democratic governance is in doubt. And if that goes by the boards, then our chances of solving these other problems go way, way down.
Okay, I have some more questions, but maybe I just want to take a pause here and see if anyone in the audience, if any of those kind of stimulated some thoughts or questions you want to have. So if you have one, please speak up. Otherwise, we can move ahead. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we've solved that problem.
All right.
At least. So I want to touch more on the sort of the connection thing. You also talk about safetyism in the book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what safetyism is and how that sort of plays into these problems you're describing?
So this pertains to what I call the crisis of dynamism. On the one hand, it's just in the numbers. Productivity growth was robust during the sort of for 2 or 3 decades after World War II, and then in the mid 70s hit a trough. And then, except for the United States from the mid 90s to the mid O's, so for that one country, that one decade exception, it's been in that trough ever since for the advanced capitalist world. So productivity growth has slowed way down. So that's what we can measure. Below that, we have, I think, it's clear that all kinds of barriers to innovation and growth have reared up through regulation, through not only through environmental regulation, but through a broader environmental sensibility. They got really freaked out about the dangers of technology run amok, and so became very skeptical about sort of, you know, humanity's Promethean quest to master the forces of nature. It started sounding like, more like Dr. Frankenstein rather than something that we would want to emulate on an ongoing basis. And so, really, on a across a range of dimensions, we just kind of stopped things. So we put footprints on the moon, and then we stopped going until this week. Uh, we developed, supersonic air travel, and then discontinued it. Uh, we developed nuclear power plants, and then stopped building them. And so, in area after area, we just kind of put the brakes on this, what I call sort of Promethean progress. We still, so the IT world opened up, and we saw this whole realm of virtual progress, and that was, pollution free and didn't have labor conflicts involved with it, and didn't have environmental problems, and was this kind of just wonderfully frictionless world that it seemed to create. And so we imagined for a while that IT was all we needed, and that we really could sort of, that we were the developed world, right? We called ourselves the developed world, like we were done. And pretty much from that point forward, we made it very difficult to do any more development, right? Any more real estate development. It's very hard to build anything in big cities anymore, starting in the late 70s. And so in recent years, we've seen, sort of a reawakening of hard tech, of new, of big, exciting developments in solar and wind, and new interest in nuclear power and advanced geothermal. We've seen, dramatic progress again in space travel, with a 90% reduction in launch costs due to SpaceX's reusable rockets. So things are waking up, but we still have this kind of soporific culture of complacency, which is, I think, that explains the vetocracy, which is that we're okay with it being very difficult to do anything new because things are pretty comfortable now. So this is a general, psychological trait at the individual level. We call it loss aversion, that it hurts worse to lose something you have than to forego a hypothetical gain. And so at sort of mass level, we see loss aversion playing out at scale. We've got, as we grew rich, we got more and more people with more stuff to lose, with a bigger stake in the status quo, with perceiving more threats from economic change because that could disturb my privileged position in the status quo. As we got richer, our communications technology got better, which meant we could team up with each other and organize more efficiently, which meant it was easy for those of us with a shared interest in preserving the status quo to team up and create veto points and throw sand in the gears of creative change. So that happened, and then even more, sort of more deeply and profoundly. We worry about changes now because we're much more physically risk averse than we used to be. Once upon a time, when industrial accidents were commonplace, and epidemic diseases were unchecked, people could drop dead, be healthy one day and drop dead the next, and so there was a certain fatalism that went along with that, and the risks that went along with building the Empire State Building in 18 months didn't look out of line with the risks that people faced all the time anyway. But now we've gotten to the point where, dying before old age is just is a sort of a rarity and a tragedy. And so very naturally, we have become much more focused on avoiding those unusual and tragic outcomes. And so that's fine. That's a good thing. And it's logical and natural. And we should push that to a point. Question is, the problem is there's once you get going on that slope, it's hard to find any firm footing on the way down. And so we know in real life we don't value human life at infinity. We make trade-offs all the time that put a finite value on human life for ourselves as well as for others. But once you inject this kind of safetyism into the political process, it doesn't know where to stop. And so we get, I think, a lot of kludge in the system that way. We get it in our daily lives as well. I think we see the rise of helicopter parenting, of this terror that something amiss might happen with their children. This idea that we can somehow or another raise them, wrapped in bubble wrap and immunized from all risk and all danger. But all that does is produce just, completely helpless, maladapted, people who are not cut out for living in the real world. So, now it seems increasingly common that young people show up at job interviews with their parents, and unable to make eye contact. And so there's this kind of, hothouse flower syndrome, that is culturally just totally antithetical to the sort of rough and tumble risk preference profile you would see associated with a real dynamic society. So I think culturally we've seen becoming rich has made it easier for us to get complacent and to get too risk averse, and therefore to make it difficult to maintain the prosperity that we now take for granted.
Yeah, I'm going to actually ask one of our guests here. Daniela we both live in Oklahoma City, and Daniela is a professor at the University of Oklahoma. Have you seen that, Daniela, with, sort of parents like wanting to micromanage their kids or other types of safetyism?
A little bit. Parents will come in and insist on, better grades for their students and that kind of thing. That hasn't been a huge problem. I read about it a lot in the Chronicle of Higher Education that this kind of thing
Yes,
happens.
yes.
But I think there is a strong sense among administrators of protecting the students. So I don't see so much the parents being the problem, but the administrators don't say anything in the classroom that might upset their sensibilities, that kind of thing. So in that sense, the fear, that they might experience something difficult. I think I experience it more in terms of my bosses wanting us to keep the students safe.
And that connects up with another trend that is just a natural outgrowth of economic progress, which is that the post-industrial service-oriented information economy elevates this large white-collar workforce of professionals and managers, and they become, a very large fraction of the workforce. They become the highest paid part of the salaried workforce. They become the kind of dominant class in society. And, if you got a hammer, the world looks like a nail. And to managers, the world looks like a place that needs to be managed, right? And so any sort of zone out there of completely spontaneous, uncoordinated activity is very distressing to the managerial mind, right? They know that if they just came in there and instituted best practices, that things could be done a whole lot better and more efficiently, and things would work out better for everybody. And so there is this managerial mindset, which you see on campus. We see it in the public sector with proliferating regulation of this, that, and the other thing. We see it in the private sector with the HRization of company life, and then for wage employees, for the sort of intrusive surveillance of every keystroke and bathroom break that employees might make. So we've got this kind of managerialism run amok. It's a natural tendency birthed from our our style of economic production, but one that I think that has wandered into kind of dysfunctional areas and is making life more difficult rather than better for us. So that's another tendency that is dampening dynamism and more broadly making it more difficult for us to have the kind of agency that is an essential component of a well-lived, flourishing life.
Yeah. I mean, also just on the connection thing, I think I first came across this in an Atlantic article a few years ago, and now I just can't not notice it. So like here in Oklahoma City, I'm new to the area, and Daniela has shown me around. There's this one really beautiful old neighborhood called, is it Heritage Hills? Is that the name of it? That's, all these 100-year-old houses, big, just very beautiful architecture and these like big front porches on them, right? And then if you go north, there's an area that's newer called Nichols Hills, which is very wealthy. It's like where the NBA players live, in places like that. But the houses they all look like enclaves. They're sort of back away from the street. There's a small front door, I imagine a huge backyard with a pool and all that stuff. And it used to be that people would just sit on the front porch, and watch people walk by and just talk to them. And that just does not happen anymore. And I'm wondering if there's something about the built environment. I mean, it's common on, social media to see sort of trad types talking about this is what they took from you, but it's
Right.
usually like a white family with three kids and the dad coming home from work. But I think it's actually the front porch that was taken, or the old style of architecture. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that can be done to kind of in the built environment to make it more sort of
Oh, yeah. Let me start with just a specific, and then I'll broaden out. So Robert Putnam wrote the book Bowling Alone about this kind of decline of social capital, about the decline of
Mhm.
connectedness, and he wrote that 20 or 30 years ago, and it's held up very well. And in his uh, investigations as to what was driving this, his number one suspect was television. Television, drove us inside. It created this kind of solitary form of entertainment. It
Air conditioning has helped a lot too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
did too. So
yeah.
more broadly, though, I would say that, in the old days, flesh and blood relationships with family and neighbors fulfilled vital practical functions. So we didn't do them just because they were good for us. We did them because we had to, right? So our kids, first we couldn't stop having kids because we had a sex drive and we didn't have birth control and they were acts of God. And but then once they were there, kids were an economic asset. They helped you out on the farm. They took care of you when you're older. Your neighbors were, protection against marauders. They were an insurance policy when, if some individual misfortune struck your family. And for entertainment purposes, they were pretty much the only alternative to listening to the crickets at night was hanging out with them. So, but we have gradually, as we've gotten richer, succeeded in outsourcing those functions to the market and to the welfare state. And so that's fine. That's good. But that means we don't need people as urgently and as practically as we did before. Um, so it's sort of the path of least resistance to ignore their long-term importance for our well-being. And I think so. We've retreated into these big houses, which is nice. It's nice to have a big house. It's nice to have stuff, um, but it's the opportunity cost that's the problem, right? It's what we're not doing. The private homes are wonderful. The big screen TVs are wonderful. They'd be much more wonderful if you were if you were watching them all with your family, or if a whole group of people were watching something together. So that once upon a time, the living room, the TV was at least a platform for family togetherness. It's not that way anymore. Now everybody watches their own thing, on their phone. So, but we have gotten to the point where things that we once did because we had to, we're going to have to figure out ways to do again because they're good for us over the long term. So that's a sort of an encompassing challenge of affluence and of the permanent problem is capitalism is very good at giving us what we want. It's not very good at encouraging us to want the right things, to want what we want to want, right? So those second order desires tend to get lost in the shuffle in consumerism. And once upon a time, we attended to those second order desires because it was utterly impractical not to. Now we need to attend to them, or we're old and miserable in the in our in the second half of our lives. So so that's the challenge: is to replace with kind of planning and artifice things that sort of naturally fell into our laps before as elements of well-being.
Yeah, it's kind of like going to the gym, right? It
That's right.
used to be everyone worked outside. You didn't really need to go to the gym. You walked everywhere. You had to,
Exactly right. And
yeah,
and and so we're now about to face that with AI. For uh, for a golden stretch of decades, the most diverting entertainment medium that was readily available for most people was books, and books are just like you know CrossFit for cognitive function, right? They are an excellent workout, and so just by people pursuing their natural first order desire for diversion, they were training their brains with pleasure reading to make themselves smarter. So that was happening. Then, meanwhile, capitalism was developing this huge demand for first literate workers and then for well-educated knowledge workers. And so we had this enormous explosion in college education and tertiary education. So people were in school a lot longer. So that's happening right around the same time that TV kicks in. So TV kicks in. Now pleasure reading is starting to go into long-term decline, but college reading for more and more people is going up, right? Um, uh, but now we've kind of gotten to the point uh, where college has become, it's lost its old sort of, intellectual rigor for its own sake identity. It's a mill for stamping credentials for people to enter the meritocracy. And so um, more and more people enter it wanting to do as little work as possible and grow as little intellectually as possible. And now AI has come along and, LLMs have come along to do all the kids' homework for them. And so it is now possible to, outsource learning, right, to LLMs. But that doesn't make you any smarter. Just like if you told your robot to go to the gym and work out, you're still going to be a mess, right? So we're just as we left the farm, we left the factory, we had sedentary jobs in offices, and we had to learn the self-discipline to go to the gym, and we have to make ourselves, physically fit. We're going to have to make the conscious choice and make the effort to stay intellectually fit, and we're going to have to make the choice to be sort of socially and interpersonally fit by being connected with other people. It's not just going to happen automatically for us anymore.
yeah. I mean, given the rise in obesity over the last 50 years, I'm scared to think what the sort of the cognitive version of that is. Daniela, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of follow up on what you were saying about education and what happens in colleges. So I'm in a classics and letters department that is, all we do is non-vocational.
Right.
Greek, Latin, literature, philosophy, none of it is required for any career. But we have a lot of students, and our classes are very highly enrolled, and our students
Good.
go on to law school, so it doesn't hurt their careers in any way. But we do have an administrative class at the university that keeps trying to hold us accountable to what they call efficiencies. So the dean will come and talk about, these efficiencies. You have to make every unit efficient, even though the university is doing really well financially as a whole. So we're like, well, why can't you sustain programs like ancient Greek that only draw a small number of students, but nonetheless they're passionately connected to that field. They love it. It's very important to their lives. But why don't we sustain that? Because we're a university, we should be sustaining those things that aren't maybe very popular, but they're thinking in terms of efficiencies. So, this thing that people will call like a business ontology seems to rule even when it's not necessary for any kind of bottom line. What do we do?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not our students have the interest, but our administrators don't, and it's troubling.
So that's I've heard that, from other people as well. So, of course, there are still students who are turned on intellectually and want to learn for learning's sake. I don't think there's as many of them as there used to be, but they still exist, and it's sad when they're there and the administration of the university doesn't want to serve them. That's tragic. So the university itself is undergoing, a strange, very uncertain, period of transition. So it was elevated by this economic transition. So the demand, the economic demand for all these knowledge workers created this huge demand for college grads, which then for these glory years from the 50s, 60s, and 70s for academics, uh, you know, uh, produced a huge demand for professors, and then for grad students to be more professors, and so forth. Um, but we're kind of at the end of that run now, and just at the most brutal level, where the actual population of 18-year-olds is maxing out, and is not growing faster, because population aging, and population growth slowdown. So we're not looking forward to ongoing increases. We're kind of maxed out at the percentage of people who are capable of handling a college education. We're kind of maxed out on the number of kids there that we make. So the economic prospects are kind of all downhill from here for universities, and some of them are already going to the wall. Fortunately, it looks like the most disreputable, is the for-profit diploma mills that are hitting the wall first. So that's good news. But a lot of other institutions are going to hit the wall because and we're so there was this, universities had been this learning for learning's sake kind of refuge from the commercial world, but then they became sort of, integrated into the capitalist system by becoming this credentialing agent. And so this, what you call business ontology, just naturally gravitated over in there. And so the old learning for learning's sake is finding the university environment sort of more and more inhospitable. So I think the future of the humanities and the future of learning for learning's sake, whether that's occurring in in the institutions we now call universities or in different institutions in the future, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see institutional shakeup.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in college in the 80s, and like every graduating student, I was like, how the hell do I get a job? And I remember like talking to parents, and, especially friends of mine, their parents, they were like, yeah, back when we were in school, we just kind of studied and, we sort of studied what we wanted. And then you got out and you looked around and you found a job, and it wasn't like, you had to have internships and co-op
Right.
programs and all these things to kind of funnel you. So it's been a long time building. Um, I did want to ask you to sort of compare sort of what you're talking about to kind of the post-liberals like Patrick Deneen and Sohrab Ahmari, and what's the because they're sort of circling around some of the same issues, kind of the latent sort of like discontent,
Yep.
about liberalism. And so what's the dividing line between kind of what their project is and what you're doing?
So first, just very quickly, we see some of the same symptoms, but our diagnoses and prescriptions are radically different. So on the symptoms, I think with the kind of post-liberal types like Deneen. I'm worried about uh, atomism, social disconnection. I'm worried about sort of the managerialism run amok, the sort of creeping unfreedom of an increasingly bureaucratized and rationalized world. Um, but they claim to see in these symptoms the kind of final comeuppance of a ideology that was flawed from its inception, right? That liberalism was doomed from its Enlightenment roots, or maybe it was, maybe we went off the wrong course, with the Reformation, or maybe we go all the way back to William of Ockham and nominalism and rejection of Platonic forms. Somewhere along the line, way back, we went off in the wrong direction, and now we're finally, paying the price for it. So that I think is, I, I have no sympathy with whatsoever. I think that the post-Enlightenment liberalism, gave us our greatest triumphs as a species, right? It has uh, vastly increased our numbers while lifting us up out of poverty. Uh, it has, created the uh, healthiest, happiest, best, most intelligent, best governed societies that have ever existed. So um, they could be a lot better, right? And they have a lot of problems right now, and they may be in the process of actually deteriorating. So there are real problems. But we're the problems I see, what I call the crisis of capitalism, they're all consequences of prior successes, right? But that's just the way of life, that every problem, solving one problem then creates new problems. You solve those, that creates new problems. You just keep going. There's no utopia. There's no final resting place. So by solving mass poverty, we've, opened up some other cans of worms that we need to deal with, and that's what my book is about. But if we can do that successfully, then liberalism and modernity go to an even higher level of achievement and well-being. So their sense that we must go back and that rewind centuries of history because it was all misbegotten, I just reject utterly.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned utopia, and I feel like that's, sort of, if you go far left to communism and far right to theocracy, they're both promising utopia on some level. And that's alluring, right? It's like, yes, one day we will be at this end state and everyone will be happy. Um,
Yeah, and I don't try to, I don't try to identify that as the happy ending, the permanent problem. I don't think there's a utopia. I identify widespread opportunities for flourishing lives. That's about as good as we can get because I think a flourishing society will be a society that allows a lot of individual freedom. You don't get the agency and the innovation and the dynamism to create a flourishing society without a lot of individual freedom. But with individual freedom comes the freedom to choose wrong. So there's going to be people who squander their potential and screw up their lives, and it's going to happen. So we're going to have messiness in any society going forward because it's made by human beings. They're imperfect, and because freedom is an essential element of broader flourishing, and that allows people to kind of go off in predictably bad directions while every once in a while going off in a completely unpredictable, wonderful direction. So that's the bargain. And I think it's a good bargain, but it doesn't include perfection. And it doesn't include sort of changeless, idyllic stability.
Yeah, but it also just creates a horrible marketing problem for liberalism. It doesn't have the happy ending exactly. I mean,
But we can say, I think we can aim to make things tangibly, concretely better. And I try to do that in the book and to outline a hopeful future that's where we re-imbue some of our face-to-face relationships with practical functions, by uh, using our wealth to build smaller and more self-sufficient communities, uh, and uh, and sort of use the freedom we have with all the riches we have to choose lifestyles that integrate us on a day-to-day basis and in practical ways with other people.
Yeah. Um, so let's maybe pivot a little bit and talk just about kind of sort of policy levers. I mean, what, do you have some in mind that you think could help us, reorient us in the directions you want to see?
Sure. I think one of the few sort of hopeful political developments we've seen in recent years is this so-called abundance movement. There was this book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson called Abundance that came out last year. It was a big bestseller. It's sort of generalizing from the problems with that we've are experiencing in one big city after another with housing and unaffordable housing because of the increasing difficulty of building new housing. Generalizing from that big serious problem, we see that same kind of problem in a whole lot of other areas where we've got artificial constraints on supply that are making us poorer than we need to be. So through vetocracy, through excessive zoning and other kinds of restrictions, we've made it very
Real quick,
difficult to build new houses.
could you explain vetocracy
Yeah,
so that people
yeah.
understand?
Just by vetocracy, I mean the uh, sort of current political economy in which anyone who's sort of building anything has to jump through a whole bunch of veto points. That there are at any stage in the at every stage in the process, there are people who have to check the box for things to keep going. And so we've put more and more of those boxes in through allowing sort of very liberal standing requirements so that people can sue and challenge developments and so forth. We've made zoning down at the very, decisions about land use at a very sort of hyper local level. So we have lots and lots of veto points, for how much an urban area can build collectively. So I think the abundance movement wants to see in housing, in energy, in transportation, also in healthcare, the removal of these artificial barriers so that we can have more plentiful supply and therefore more affordable sort of staples of modern living. So this isn't about sort of adding more sort of, uh, consumer bells and whistles and sort of new TikTok videos and fripperies. And, this is about the sort of elemental staples of modern life that cost too much, housing, transportation, energy. And so we can make those a lot more affordable. And I think that's a big problem in a lot of cities and throughout the country. And so the abundance movement is pushing in the right direction. To push it sort of radically in that direction, to have a concerted drive to drive down the cost of living, so that if you married that real success with an abundance movement and real technological breakthroughs that could reduce the cost of housing uh, uh, in the same way that we've seen reductions in the cost of food and clothing, so that an affluent lifestyle would be affordable at a much lower income level than it is today, and so that the possibility of early retirement would loom into view for a lot more people than it does today. That's the kind of future that I want to aim for, so that more and more people don't have to work full time, and so that then they can redirect their efforts towards community rather than towards just paying the bills. Um, so the abundance movement generally, I think, is a policy push that's in the right direction. There's a lot of areas that in the sort of housing realm and in the zoning realm that it really hasn't touched yet. So as I envision people living with friends and and family and kind of co-housing units. And so as more and more of us are remote workers or are independently wealthy and then don't have to live next to the office but can live anywhere we want to, already 20% of employees now are remote workers. So that's a big chunk of the workforce. It was 2% in the 1980s, so it's grown a lot. Uh, so if more and more people can choose, to live wherever they want to, that means they can live with people they know and like. And then, and if you can kind of live in compounds that have common areas, you can have a real vital community life. But right now, that's illegal in a lot of places. It's illegal to have houses with unrelated people co-owning it. It's illegal to have actually too many, non-related people living together in the same house in a lot of under a lot of city codes. They're not really enforced very well because you get these, college, or 20-something roommate kind of situations. But for grown-ups who wanted to build a life and have legal certainty, it's legally prescribed right now. It would also be a lot easier to have a more vital home-based life if there were more of a mix of work and life around each other. So if you had neighborhoods with shops and amenities that you could go to, but that's all illegal. Home-based businesses, so you can work at home. Many of them are illegal. So there's a whole lot of ways in which we could blur the distinction between work and home. First, through making housing cheaper so that then we don't have to marry work and home. And then second, through zoning reforms so that we can sort of have neighborhoods where work and life aren't sort of artificially separated as they are today. And that's a new thing that didn't used to be the case, right? People used to work on their homes. They were farmers. And then we've had a couple hundred years where first men went off to factories and then women followed into the paid workforce. We're starting to see a migration back into the home. And I think that's a healthy development. And that's one that will be congenial to a more sort of people-friendly lifestyle. And we should be actively encouraging that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I've kind of lived in a few different places, and I mostly kind of live the atomized consumer lifestyle, But at the same time, really starting in the pandemic, I was a member of a Slack group that started doing conversations like this twice a month. And on the one hand, I wish we could be in person, but we're literally scattered all over North America. And we do it twice a month. And then I've been part of Intellect for probably 18 months now. And I would kill. I mean, if someone took that away from me, I would be so upset, being able to have just conversations with people about stuff like this. And that's harder to make happen even in a mid-sized city like Oklahoma City. But we have this telepresence technology that makes it possible. So I
Yeah,
do see sort of green shoots in all that.
that's right. That's right. So there's a lot of, sort of alienating and atomizing potential in IT. But there is, I mean, for the first 20 years of, the internet, all we saw was upside and all we saw was people with
Hmm.
weird interests and finally realizing I'm not the only person like this. There are other people like me and finding, groups of people who shared your interests or values. And that's a wonderful thing. So those online communities are real and they do matter and we should encourage and sustain them. But for most people, it's the flesh and blood contact and just the real personal history that you share together is irreplaceable as well.
Yeah. So let's kind of segue toward a close here. So um, I guess we can sort of start with this and then, I think you mentioned in the book, like Tyler Cowen's The Great Stagnation, which was a lot of what you talk about starting in the mid 70s, everything slowed down. But he declared it over a few years ago. I think he called the COVID vaccine the kind of the that, and then of course AI LLMs is like stimulating this new level. So, there are some green shoots there, and maybe riffing off of that or some other ideas you might have, like where do you see it going? So like in 20 years from now, we're having the same conversation looking back. Um, what do you think? How will you know we've exited the flourishing trap? What will that look like? What will be the indicators of that?
Yeah, I think it will mostly that there are policy and institutional changes that will help push things in the right direction, but ultimately what we need are cultural changes. Um, and we may be seeing, some early signs of the kinds of cultural changes we might want to look for happening right under our nose right now. So um, our experience with life online is new. It's just we're 3 decades and change into it. For the first couple of decades, it seemed to be all upside. Since around 2015 or 2016, we've been more and more aware of the downsides. And we're sort of slowly recognizing there's this broad sense that I think a lot of people have been triggered by the dysfunctions of politics to think, well, something must be wrong more deeply in society for us to be acting out like this in the political realm. So what's ailing us? Why are we so rich and so acting so weird and acting so dysfunctionally? So a lot of people are worrying about this, and a lot of people, I think, have have got kind of a hangover from of our online bender, right? Of pursuing this, uh, you know, solitary screen staring uh, to the exclusion of other things. And so now you're hearing increasingly people calling on others to touch grass, right? That we need to get back in contact with the real world. So I think there's a hunger for touching grass and for life off and for the attractions of life offline. There's a recognition in our sort of frictionless online loneliness that the sort of messy, awkward, smelly chaos of other people is also brings with it a vitality that you just can't get anywhere else. And so we're I think we're uh, you don't recognize what had until you don't have it anymore, right? So we've been sort of trying to live life without these basic building blocks of a flourishing life for a while now, and we're recognizing the absence. So I think we're starting to see you know, cultural shifts towards uh, sort of reprioritizing real world activity and flesh and blood connection. So I hope we can continue pushing in those directions. Uh, I, again, we're all little individuals in these enormous systems. So if we can't fix the systems and reform them so that they're better regulated and so that they're more consistent with human flourishing, then so if liberal democracy collapses and we're all in sort of corrupt personalist autocracies, then we're all going to do the best we can outside of politics, but we're going to be a lot worse off than we would have been if we could have gotten our political act together. So we can hope in 20 years that our politics has gotten back to problem solving that makes all of us better off, rather than contests that sort of just drive us to hate each other more and more and to put each other down more and more. So that's something we can look forward to in 20 years. That's better. We can look forward to seeing an embrace of dynamism in the real world, not just online, with all these kind of dazzling hard tech possibilities in energy and in transportation. So that's great. We could imagine a cultural development of as if we really did have economic takeoff, and AI, this real wild card. It could be accelerating all of these trends. So it could dramatically increase economic growth. It could dramatically reduce the cost of living. It could dramatically push us towards a kind of post full-time, employment future. So we'll see how that goes in 20 years. It could also push us towards all kinds of nasty dystopias. So I agree. The next 20 years are going to be really telling. I expect to see us either, you know, finding our footing on paths leading in promising directions, or maybe things getting considerably worse than they are right now.
Yeah, just as an aside, sort of two thoughts. One is you mentioned kind of the how sci-fi kind of pivoted from, I think it's Peter Thiel who mentioned that, like, sci-fi used to be all about, isn't it going to be cool? We're going to have all these cool technologies and we're going to
Right.
explore the universe. And somewhere it pivoted into dystopian, like, isn't it going to be awful when all these technologies come and destroy society? The show I most like that I think is kind of, in one sense, optimistic, but also kind of aligns with sort of what you talk about is The Expanse. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes. Yes.
On one hand, it is really cool technology. On the other hand, people still kind of suck, and everyone's trying to get power and
Yep.
dominate other people. So I think it sort of shows both sides of it. And then another thing, I just sort of hit on this a couple days ago. A very common thing you see in discourse is late capitalism. We're in late capitalism.
Which is a term that arose in the late 19th or early 20th century. So we've been in late capitalism for quite a while.
Right. So I'm just going to just casually just start saying early capitalism. Just going to,
Yes.
it's really challenging these days of early capitalism, but I think we're going to get better. So does anyone else have
That's
any
good
final?
because, yeah, Homo sapiens has been on the scene for about 300,000 years. Uh, we civilization, writing have been around for about 10,000 years. So agriculture, sedentary life, 10,000 years. Civilization, writing, 6,000 years. But then, the modern, the economic and scientific modernity. It's just a couple of centuries. This is an eye blink, right? Um, I knew my grandfather, and he knew his grandfather, and his grandfather fought in the Civil War before, mass production really got going. So, I'm just, 2 degrees of separation from the before time, right? So we are really still in early days in this incredible discontinuity in human affairs, which is the wealth explosion from technology and organization intensive capitalism. And it's utterly inevitable in exploring this wild, woolly frontier that we're going to have, lots of messy stumbles. We had terrible stumbles all through the 20th century. We nearly blew the world up with nuclear war, with the conflict between socialism and capitalism. It's par for the course that we're having difficulty right now. It's not easy, being at the frontier of the human experience. But there are, truly glittering possibilities out there, and I think realistic paths to getting there. So we shouldn't be disheartened because a lot of things suck right now. A lot of things have always sucked, and we are. The kinds of things that we worry about sucking are things that wouldn't even occur to other people to worry about because they're so far removed from just the immediate concerns of food, shelter, and clothing. So we're blessed with our problems. We should think of it that way, but it doesn't mean we should be complacent about our problems. They're real and they can undo us. But we should be hopeful, and we should be excited about what comes next.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect ending to it. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank you, Brink. What is it, 12, almost, it's after midnight there,
A little
right?
after midnight here in Thailand.
Yeah, so he made the sacrifice. And I appreciate your joining us for this. And I hope everyone has a pleasant Sunday,
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for
Saturday or
coming.
Sunday, depending on where
All
you
right.
are. Take care.
Thank you very
All right.
much. Good luck
Bye-bye.
with the book.
Bye-bye.